After buying my beach house for holidays and rental income, my son-in-law called and said, "Me and my 17 relatives are coming for Christmas. Have everything ready for our arrival." I said, "Sure, son," but when I handed them the $5,000 bill as they were leaving, and that's when all hell broke loose. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. The air at Serenity Sands was different. It was a thick, comforting mixture of salt, pluff mud, and the sweet perfume of the jasmine I'd planted along the deck. Here on Hilton Head Island, the world moved at the pace of the tides. For the first time in my 64 years, so did I. After a 4-decade career as a financial controller in Charlotte, where my life was dictated by quarterly reports and the unforgiving chime of a digital calendar, this quiet rhythm was a gift I had given myself. The house wasn't a whim, it was the culmination of a life lived by the numbers. Every extra dollar from a freelance audit, every bonus I'd ever received, every penny I'd pinched by brewing my own coffee instead of buying it, it had all been funneled into the beach house fund. The house itself was my masterpiece. A 3-story, 5-bedroom home with a sprawling deck, a small, glittering pool, and a private boardwalk that meandered through swaying sea oats directly onto the sand. I had spent 6 months overseeing renovations, picking out every fixture, every piece of furniture. The color palette was a calming blend of sand, sea glass, and coral. The kitchen was a gourmet dream, a place I imagined spending quiet mornings baking muffins for myself and my daughter, Simone. It was my sanctuary. But as a woman who spent 40 years turning assets into profits, I was also a pragmatist. This sanctuary had to earn its keep. I'd formed an LLC, set up a professional booking website, and had already filled the calendar for the next summer season. The rental income wasn't just a bonus, it was a meticulously planned component of my retirement strategy. This house was a business, a beautiful, soul-soothing business, but a business nonetheless. My daughter Simone understood. When she came to visit for the first time, her eyes had filled with tears. "Mama, you did it," she'd whispered, wrapping her arms around me. "It's everything you ever talked about." Simone, a gentle soul who taught 2nd grade, had her father's heart and thankfully my head for numbers. She appreciated the dream, but she also respected the investment. She saw the carefully laminated house rules I'd placed in each room, the professional binder with information on local amenities, and the discreet sign by the pool that listed capacity and safety warnings. She saw it all and she understood. We spent a perfect weekend together, just the two of us. We drank wine on the deck as the sun went down, leaving streaks of orange and purple across the sky. We walked on the beach in the morning, collecting shells like we used to when she was a little girl. It was peaceful. It was mine. That peace lasted exactly 2 weeks. I was sitting on a lounge chair by the pool, a novel resting on my lap and a tall glass of iced tea sweating on the table beside me, when my phone rang. The screen displayed a smiling picture of my son-in-law Gary. I smiled, too. Gary was a good man. A charismatic high school football coach, beloved by his students and his massive, boisterous family. He was the life of every party, a man who could fill any room with his booming laugh. He loved Simone fiercely, and for that I would always be grateful. But Gary operated on a different frequency than I did. He was a man of grand gestures and casual assumptions, a man who lived by the unwritten, often inconvenient rule that what's mine is yours. "Deb, how's the queen of the castle?" he boomed when I answered. "Living the good life down there?" "I'm trying, Gary," I laughed. "It's a tough job, but someone has to do it. We'll get ready for it to get a whole lot better." "I've got great news," he announced, his voice brimming with a self-congratulatory excitement that immediately put me on high alert. Great news for Gary often meant unforeseen complications for everyone else. "What's that?" I asked, a knot of apprehension tightening in my stomach. "I've sorted out Christmas for the whole family. The Carters are coming to the beach," he declared. "Me and my 17 relatives are coming to Serenity Sands for Christmas week. We'll be there the morning of the 22nd, and leave the morning of the 29th. Have everything ready for our arrival." I sat up straight, my novel sliding to the floor. The cicadas in the nearby palmetto trees seemed to buzz louder, a frantic warning sound. 17 relatives. For a week. In my brand new house, it wasn't a question, it was a declaration, a royal proclamation from King Gary, first of his name, "Have everything ready for our arrival." The words echoed in my ears. He wasn't asking for a favor, He was giving me my marching orders. My mind, the mind of a financial controller, began to spin. 17 people plus Gary made 18. 18 people for 7 nights during a peak holiday week. That was water heaters working overtime, a septic system under siege, astronomical electricity bills, and the kind of wear and tear that could age a new property by years. Not to mention the loss of potential rental income. Christmas week was one of the most lucrative times of the year. My first instinct, the instinct of a homeowner and a businesswoman, was to say, absolutely not, Gary. That's not possible. The house is a rental property. But my second instinct, the one honed by years of navigating delicate family dynamics, knew that a flat-out refusal would be a declaration of war. Simone would be caught in the crossfire, a miserable, tear-streaked casualty of a battle between her husband's family and her mother. The Carters, a proud and fiercely loyal clan, would see it as a personal rejection, a sign that my new fancy life had made me too good for them. The word bougie would be thrown around. The fallout would be catastrophic. Gary took my silence for delighted speechlessness. I know, right? It's going to be legendary. Mama is so excited she's already planning the menu. Uncle Ronnie is bringing his deep fryer for a big fish fry on Christmas Eve. It's gonna be the best Carter Christmas ever, Deb. All thanks to you. All thanks to me. I was being cast as the benevolent benefactor of a party I hadn't been consulted on, a party that would cost me thousands of dollars and untold stress. The injustice of it was a hot, bitter pill. But screaming and yelling wasn't my style. In my old job, when a department head would come to me with an outrageous, unworkable budget request, I didn't get emotional. I got organized. I used logic, numbers, and documentation to make my case. Emotion could be argued with. A spreadsheet could not. A plan began to form in my mind. A clear, logical, and utterly professional path through the impending chaos. I wouldn't be Deb, accommodating mother-in-law. I would be Deborah Henderson, owner of Serenity Sands, LLC, and the Carter family would be my clients. I took a slow, deliberate breath, calming the frantic buzzing in my chest. When I spoke, my voice was a mask of pleasant warmth. Sure, son, I said, the words feeling foreign and calculated on my tongue. That sounds like a wonderful idea. A big family Christmas at the beach. I'll get everything in order. The relief in his voice was palpable. You're the best, Deb. I knew you'd be thrilled. All right, I'll let everyone know it's a go. See you on the 22nd. He hung up before I could say another word. I slowly lowered the phone, the silence of my sanctuary rushing back in, feeling fragile and temporary. He thought I'd be thrilled. He had no idea. I wasn't thrilled. I was preparing for battle. And my weapon of choice wouldn't be anger. It would be a legally binding contract. The moment I hung up with Gary, I walked from my tranquil poolside oasis directly into my office. The transition was immediate and absolute. I was no longer Deb the retiree. I was Deborah Henderson, financial controller. Back in my element, the pleasant smile I'd worn for the phone call was gone, replaced by a focused, determined line. The target was clear: mitigate damages, establish boundaries, and convert a chaotic family invasion into a structured business transaction. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I opened the template I used for all my official renters, a professional document I'd paid a lawyer to draft. I changed the client name to the Carter Family Holiday. Then, I began to populate the fields, not with emotion but with cold, hard numbers. First, the rental rate. I pulled up the market comparisons for a 5-bedroom luxury home on Hilton Head during Christmas week. The number was substantial. I typed it in: $500 per night. For 7 nights, that was $3,500. Next, the cleaning fee. My professional cleaners charged a premium for post-holiday deep cleans, especially for large groups. I added a standard non-negotiable fee of $400. Then came the occupancy clause. The house comfortably slept 12. Gary had announced 18. The contract clearly stated that any guests beyond the maximum occupancy of 12 would incur an additional charge of $25 per person per night. For 6 extra people over 7 nights, that was another $1,050. Finally, the security deposit, a fully refundable $500 to be held against any damages incurred during the stay. The contract spelled out exactly what constituted damage: stained linens, broken furniture, misuse of appliances, anything beyond normal wear and tear. I also made sure the house rules were embedded directly into the document. No glass by the pool, no rearranging of furniture, All trash to be placed in the exterior bins. The property is to be left in a reasonably tidy condition upon departure. And crucially, a list of all overnight guests must be provided upon arrival. The document was a thing of beauty. It was clear, professional, and utterly devoid of family sentiment. It was the armor I would wear into this battle. Now, for the delivery, I couldn't just send it with a note saying, "Here's your bill." That would trigger the very war I was trying to avoid. The presentation had to be as strategic as the document itself. I drafted a new email, my tone light, breezy, and completely innocuous. Subject: quick confirmation for your Christmas getaway. Hi Gary and Simone. So excited about having the whole family down for Christmas. It's going to be a wonderful week of making memories at Serenity Sands. As you know, the house is also a registered LLC, and for my insurance and liability purposes I need to have a formal agreement on file for any group stay, even for family. It's just a bit of boring paperwork the insurance company requires. Please find the standard guest agreement attached. Could you please take a quick look and e-sign at the bottom? It just confirms the dates and the number of guests, so my records are all in order. There's a section that requires a credit card to hold the dates on the calendar, again just a formality for the booking system. Can't wait to see you all on the 22nd. Love, Deb. It was a masterpiece of corporate misdirection. Every word was carefully chosen to downplay the significance of the document. Boring paperwork. Insurance purposes. Formality. I knew Gary. He hated details and paperwork. He would see a link to an e-signature, assume it was just some silly rule following on my part, and click it without a second thought. Simone, my sweet daughter, would see the loving tone and think nothing of it, trusting that her mother and her husband were on the same page. I attached the PDF of the rental agreement and a link to the secure e-signature portal. Before I hit send, I paused. Was I being sneaky? Was this a trap? No, I told myself firmly. A trap is hidden. This was a contract, presented in plain sight. It was not my fault if the other party chose not to read the terms of an agreement they were willingly signing. I was giving them the professional courtesy of a contract. Whether they treated it with professional respect was up to them. I hit send. An hour later my phone pinged with a notification. Your document, the Carter family holiday, has been signed by Gary Carter. I opened the document. There it was at the bottom. His clean, confident digital signature right next to the clause authorizing Deborah Henderson of Serenity Sands LLC to charge the provided credit card for any and all fees outlined in the agreement. A grim sense of victory settled over me. I had done my part. I had laid the foundation of professionalism and accountability. The rest was up to them. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window at the calm, endless ocean. The pieces were in place. The game had begun. The morning of December 22nd dawned bright and cold. A brisk wind whipped off the Atlantic, but the sun was shining, making the frost on the sea oats glitter like diamonds. I stood on my front porch, a mug of hot coffee warming my hands, and watched the caravan arrive. It wasn't a car, it was a fleet. 3 minivans and 2 SUVs, all packed to the brim, rolled down my quiet residential street and began to jockey for position in my driveway. The doors flew open and the Carter clan erupted. It was a tidal wave of noise, luggage, and chaotic energy that crashed against the carefully constructed tranquility of Serenity Sands. Gary was the first one out, a conquering hero returning to his seaside castle. He wrapped me in a bear hug that smelled faintly of gas station coffee and air freshener. We're here, he boomed, as if there were any doubt. The party has arrived. Behind him, his mother Patricia was already directing traffic, pointing family members toward the front door with the authority of a drill sergeant. Ronnie, you and the boys take the coolers. Tasha, baby, grab that bag with the snacks. Don't just stand there looking pretty. Uncle Ronnie, a man who seemed to be permanently vibrating with a loud, infectious energy, was already setting up a giant Bluetooth speaker on my pristine porch railing. Tasha, Gary's younger cousin, was indeed standing there looking pretty, but she wasn't idle. She was filming. Her phone was held aloft, its camera lens panning across the scene as she provided a running commentary for her social media followers. Hey y'all, we have officially touched down at the family beach house for Christmas. This place is lit. For real. Shout out to my Auntie Deb for holding it down. I was her Auntie Deb now. A quaint, familial title for the woman whose home she was about to treat like a personal content studio. I plastered a serene smile on my face, the smile of a gracious host, but in my hand I clutched a clipboard. On it was a simple check-in sheet. As each person crossed my threshold, I greeted them warmly and made a neat little checkmark next to their name on a list I'd prepared. Welcome, Patricia. So good to see you. Check. Hey, Uncle Ronnie. Glad you could make it. Check. Tasha, you look lovely. Check. They barely noticed. They were too busy claiming their territory. Bags were dropped in the entryway, creating an immediate obstacle course. The kitchen, my beautiful organized kitchen, was instantly overrun. Patricia began opening cabinets, tutting under her breath. Well, we're going to have to move some things around, she announced to no one in particular. I can't work with this setup. Where does she keep the big pots? She was not a guest in my home. She was the new head of operations, and I was the strangely incompetent manager who had set things up all wrong. The kids, a swarm of them ranging in age from 6 to 16, discovered the pool immediately. They thundered through the house and out onto the deck, their shoes leaving sandy footprints on my freshly cleaned hardwood floors. Within minutes, the sound of shrieking and splashing filled the air, drowning out the gentle rhythm of the waves. I took a deep breath, my smile feeling stretched and brittle. This was the invasion, this was the chaos I had anticipated, and my role was simple: observe, document, and survive. I had spent the previous day preparing the house for their arrival, but not in the way they expected. I wasn't fluffing pillows and putting out welcome baskets. I was taking before pictures. I had date-stamped high-resolution photos of every room from every angle. The immaculate white towels were stacked in perfect fluffy piles. The stainless steel appliances gleamed without a single fingerprint. The beige carpets were pristine. I had a digital record of the sanctuary before the barbarians arrived at the gates. Now, as the day wore on, I began compiling the after evidence. My phone was my silent secret weapon. Click. A photo of Uncle Ronnie's giant greasy deep fryer set up on my iPod deck, dangerously close to the vinyl siding, with no protective mat underneath, a clear violation of the no cooking appliances on the deck rule. Click. A photo of Tasha and 3 friends I didn't recognize. Friends who had clearly not been part of the original 17, posing by the pool with glass bottles of champagne. A clear violation of the no glass by the pool rule. I made a note on my clipboard: 4 unauthorized guests. Click. A photo of the guest bathroom, where someone had used one of my plush white bath towels to mop up a spilled bottle of foundation, leaving a hideous, greasy beige smear. The week descended into a blur of relentless noise and casual disrespect. My home, my serene sanctuary, was transformed into a 24-hour-a-day frat party. Music blared from Uncle Ronnie's speakers from morning until late into the night. The kitchen was in a perpetual state of disaster, with dirty dishes piled in the gourmet sink and a sticky film of spilled soda on the quartz countertops. Sand, it seemed, was now a permanent design feature embedded in the carpets, the upholstery, and even the beds. I tried, once or twice, to gently intervene. I approached a group of teenagers who were wrestling on my new living room sofa. Hey guys, let's be a little gentle with the furniture. Okay? I said with my most pleasant smile. They stopped for a moment, gave me a look of mild annoyance, and then resumed their horseplay the second I turned my back. I was no longer the owner of the house. I was the invisible, slightly annoying Orisei in a dormitory where the students had run amok. They were not guests in my home. They were occupants of a free, all-inclusive resort. And I was just part of the staff. The breaking point, the moment that solidified my resolve and erased any lingering guilt I might have had about the bill that was to come, happened on day 4. I was walking out to the deck to collect the wet towels that had been left in a heap on the lounge chairs when I saw Uncle Ronnie cleaning fish. He had a bucket of freshly caught whiting and was scaling them directly into my deep stainless steel outdoor sink, the one I used for arranging flowers and rinsing off sandy feet. Greasy silver scales were flying everywhere, sticking to the sink, the faucet, and the pristine white siding of the house. The guts, a slimy, bloody pile, were going straight into the garbage disposal. I felt a wave of nausea and fury. Ronnie, I called out, my voice sharper than I intended. Please don't put fish guts down the disposal. It will destroy the septic system. He looked up, surprised by my tone. Then he laughed, a big booming sound. Oh, don't you worry your pretty little head, Deb. This ain't my first rodeo. A little fish ain't gonna hurt these fancy new pipes. He turned back to his work, dismissing me completely. I was just a silly, hysterical woman who didn't understand the rugged ways of a fisherman. That evening the smell of fried fish was thick in the air, a greasy perfume that clung to the curtains and the upholstery. The smell of my violated sanctuary. I sat in my bedroom, the only space they hadn't completely conquered, and methodically uploaded the day's photographic evidence to a secure folder in the cloud. A scorched spot on the deck from the fryer, the fish scales coating the siding, the mountain of trash bags piled by the side of the house because no one could be bothered to roll the bins to the curb. I looked at the growing collection of photos, at the clear documented evidence of their disrespect. My anger was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. They were not family. Family respects you. Family cares for your home as if it were their own. This was a hostile takeover, and they had no idea that their landlord was documenting every single breach of their lease. The bill was getting longer, and my resolve was getting stronger. The week crawled by, a slow-motion demolition of my peace and my property. The chaos became a numbing, predictable rhythm. Each morning I would wake to the sound of shouting children and blaring television cartoons. I would walk through the wreckage of the previous night's festivities. Pizza boxes on the floor, empty beer bottles on the end tables, sticky rings of spilled soda on my new wooden coffee table. I would spend my days documenting the damage, a silent archivist of their destruction. My attempts at gentle boundary setting were met with a consistent, maddening response. They treated my rules not as the necessary guidelines of a property owner but as the quirky killjoy suggestions of their uptight hostess. The incident that perfectly encapsulated their attitude occurred midweek. I was in the kitchen trying to find a clean spot on the counter to make myself a cup of tea, when I saw Patricia Carter walking out toward the pool. She was carrying a tray with a pitcher of what looked like sangria and 4 large, delicate wine glasses. I intercepted her at the sliding glass door. "Oh, Patricia, that looks wonderful," I said, my voice sweet as honey. "But could you please use the plastic glasses for the pool? I have a whole set in the cabinet. It's just so dangerous to have glass out on the concrete." She stopped and looked at me, not with understanding, but with a look of profound, weary patience, the kind you'd give a fussy toddler. She patted my arm. "Oh, relax, Deb. Goodness gracious, we're family, not a bunch of strangers. Nobody's going to break anything." She smiled a wide, dismissive smile. "You need to learn to enjoy yourself. Stop worrying so much." And with that she slid the door open and walked out, leaving me standing in her wake. It wasn't just that she had ignored my rule, it was the reason she gave. "We're family." In her world that was a magic phrase, a password that granted them immunity from common courtesy and basic safety. Being family meant they didn't have to respect my property. Being family meant my concerns were invalid, my rules were silly, and my role was to simply provide the venue and stop being such a worrywart. I watched her pour the sangria into the fragile glasses, my heart pounding with a frustration so deep it felt like grief. My daughter Simone, who had seen the whole exchange, came over and gave my arm a squeeze. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered, her eyes full of a familiar, helpless anxiety. "They're just a lot. They don't mean any harm." "I know they don't, baby," I said, looking at my sweet daughter, the peacemaker, the woman caught in the middle of a culture clash she had no power to solve. But meaning no harm and doing no harm are two very different things. That night, there was a party. Apparently Tasha's uninvited friends had invited their own friends, and my home was suddenly filled with at least 25 people, most of whom I had never seen before. The music was so loud the windows were vibrating. Someone was doing cannonballs into the pool, splashing water all over the deck furniture. I retreated to my bedroom, my fortress of one, and pulled out my laptop. I opened the rental agreement, and reviewed the clauses. Extra guests, damages, cleaning fees. It was all there. I felt a grim satisfaction. I couldn't control their behavior, but I could, and would hold them accountable for it. The final day of their stay was Christmas Day. It was a blur of wrapping paper being torn to shreds and left on the floor. A massive, chaotic dinner that left the kitchen looking like a disaster zone, and a general air of sentimental self-congratulatory warmth that felt utterly disconnected from the reality of the week. That evening, as things were finally winding down, Gary found me. I was standing by the window, looking out at the deck, where a dark, greasy stain now marred the beautiful iPod wood where the deep fryer had been. He came and stood beside me, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. He was beaming, his face flushed with holiday cheer and too much of Uncle Ronnie's eggnog. "Deb," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This was legendary. Absolutely legendary. Best Christmas the Carter family has ever had. We were all just talking." He paused for dramatic effect, his chest puffing out with pride. "We're making this the official Carter family Christmas spot. We'll be back every year. Same time, same place. It's a new tradition. He said it like he was knighting me, like he was bestowing upon me the highest possible honor. He honestly believed that the promise of their return, the guarantee that they would descend upon my home year after year to reenact this week of chaos, was a gift. He was so wrapped up in his own world, in the Carter family ethos of more is more, that he was completely blind to the wreckage around him. He didn't see the stained carpets, the broken wine glass hastily kicked under a bush by the pool, the general air of exhaustion and defeat that clung to me like a shroud. He saw a successful party and a happy family. I looked at his beaming, oblivious face and I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger had burned away, leaving behind a cold, clear certainty. He didn't get it. He would never get it. And it was no longer my job to try and make him understand with words. It was time to communicate in the only language a man who refuses to read the details understands: the bottom line. I gave him a thin, brittle smile. "That's wonderful, Gary," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "I'm so glad you all had a good time." He hugged me then, a big suffocating hug. "You're the best, Deb. The absolute best." Over his shoulder I could see the mess in the living room. I could smell the lingering odor of fish and stale beer. And I could picture the beautiful itemized invoice I had already prepared, waiting silently in a folder in my office. The best, I thought. You have no idea. The morning of their departure was somehow even more chaotic than their arrival. It was a frantic whirlwind of activity, a disorganized retreat from the beachhead they had so thoroughly conquered. Every Carter seemed to be shouting at once. "Has anyone seen my other flip-flop? Who packed the phone chargers? Ronnie, for the love of God, don't put that cooler on the white sofa." I stood by the front door, a serene, smiling statue in the eye of the hurricane. I had been up since dawn, not cleaning. That was a job for the professionals I had already booked. But preparing my final presentation, my folder was on the hall table, a slim, innocuous manila file that contained a week's worth of meticulous documentation. As they began to file out, they each gave me a quick, distracted hug or a wave. "Thanks for everything, Deb. It was amazing. See you next year, Auntie Deb." They were grateful in the way you're grateful for a hotel concierge or a cruise director for services rendered. They grabbed leftover plates of food from the fridge, loaded their cars, and left a trail of sand and crumpled napkins in their wake. They were completely and utterly oblivious. They had come, they had conquered, and now they were leaving, their minds already on the drive home, the memories of their legendary vacation fresh in their minds. They left the house in a state of utter disarray. The trash cans were overflowing, with bags of garbage piled next to them on the kitchen floor. The carpets were gritty with sand. A wet, forgotten bathing suit was puddled on the floor of the guest bathroom. It was a scene of casual, thoughtless destruction. They hadn't just stayed in my home, they had consumed it. Gary and Simone were the last ones out. Simone looked exhausted, her face etched with the strain of navigating the week. She gave me a long, heartfelt hug. "Thank you for this, Mama," she whispered. "I know it was a lot." "It was my pleasure, baby," I lied, patting her back. Gary, ever the magnanimous leader, clapped me on the shoulder one last time. "We'll get out of your hair, Deb. Let you get your house back." He laughed, as if the concept of me wanting my own home back was a charming little joke. "Don't do too much cleaning now. You hear you deserve to rest." He turned to leave, his mind already on the road, on the football practice schedules he needed to prepare for the new year. He was halfway across the porch when I called his name. My voice was calm and pleasant. "Gary, wait just a second. Before you go." He turned, a questioning look on his face. I picked up the manila folder from the table. I walked over to him, my movements measured and unhurried. I held it out to him, my smile never wavering. "I'm so glad you all had a wonderful time," I said, my voice as sweet as peach tea. "Here's the final invoice for your stay." He looked at the folder, then at me, and let out a booming laugh. He thought I was joking. He thought this was some cute, quirky thing his business-minded mother-in-law did. He took the folder from me, still chuckling. "Deb, you're a character," he said, shaking his head with amusement. He flipped open the folder, expecting to see a gag gift or a funny note. And then he froze. His laughter died in his throat. His eyes scanned the top page, a professionally formatted document with the Serenity Sands LLC logo at the top. His gaze flickered over the line items: 7-night peak season rental, standard cleaning fee, additional guest surcharge, security deposit. He saw the total printed in bold at the bottom of the page: 50. The color drained from his face. The jovial, larger-than-life football coach vanished, replaced by a man staring at something he simply could not comprehend. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What? What is this?" he stammered, his voice a choked whisper. "It's your bill, Gary," I said calmly. He shook his head, a flicker of anger starting to replace the shock. He turned back toward the house, where his mother and uncle were waiting in the driveway, and he shouted, his voice cracking with outrage. "You will not believe what she just handed me." The chaos that erupted was instantaneous and absolute. It was the sound of an entire family's sense of entitlement being violently shattered. Patricia and Uncle Ronnie stormed back onto the porch, their faces thunderous. The rest of the family, hearing the commotion, began to pile out of their cars, their curious expressions quickly turning to outrage, as Gary waved the invoice in the air like a battle flag. "What is the meaning of this, Deborah?" Patricia shrieked, her voice a piercing instrument of indignation. $5,000? Are you out of your mind? We're family. This is a shakedown, Uncle Ronnie bellowed, his face turning a blotchy red. "I can't believe you'd be so shameless." Gary shoved the invoice back at me, his face a mask of betrayal. "This is a joke, right? You tricked us. You let us come here thinking it was a family Christmas, and then you hit us with this. This is low, Deb. Even for you." My smile was gone. My voice when I spoke was the flat, unimpressed tone of a controller who had just listened to a department head try to justify a wildly inflated expense report. I opened my own copy of the folder, which I had been holding at my side. "There's no trick, Gary," I said, my voice cutting through the clamor. "There's only a contract. A contract you signed." I held up the first page of my folder. It was a printed copy of the rental agreement, with his bold, clear signature at the bottom. His eyes widened. He had clearly forgotten all about the boring paperwork he had so dismissively signed a month ago. I thought that was just for insurance," he sputtered. "The terms were clearly stated," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "You agreed to a nightly rate, a cleaning fee, and a surcharge for any guests over the agreed-upon maximum of 12. You had 18 people staying here, and on some nights, thanks to Tasha and her friends, it was closer to 25. I flipped the page. "You also agreed to a security deposit to cover any damages." And then I showed them the evidence. I had printed out the photos, glossy 8x10s like exhibits in a court case. I held up the first one. "This is the grease stain on the deck from the deep fryer you were explicitly told not to use there. The estimated cost to have the iPLA professionally sanded and resealed is $300. I held up the next photo. "These are my new high-end bath towels stained with makeup and beach tar. They are ruined. Replacement cost $150. I continued, my voice a calm, relentless metronome of accountability. The photo of the fish scales on the siding. The photo of the broken wine glass by the pool. The photo of the overflowing trash that had attracted raccoons, requiring a special pest control call. With each photo, the color drained a little more from their faces. Their blustering anger was being systematically dismantled by cold, hard, undeniable facts. They hadn't been family staying for a visit. They had been careless, destructive tenants, and I had the receipts to prove it. Simone stood behind Gary, tears streaming down her face. She was caught in a nightmare, her two worlds colliding in the most brutal way imaginable. She looked at me, her expression pleading. "Mama, please," she whispered. I looked at my daughter and my heart ached for her. But this was bigger than her pain. This was about a lifetime of being the one who was expected to bend, to accommodate, to smooth things over. That woman was gone. Gary, seeing his anger was getting him nowhere, switched tactics. He tried to reclaim the moral high ground. "You set us up, Deb," he accused, his voice shaking with a righteous fury. "You let us walk right into this. You could have told us up front. You could have said no. But you played nice. You let us think we were welcome. This was a trap. Was it?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Let me ask you something, Gary. If I had told you up front that you would have to pay to stay here, would you and 17 of your relatives have come?" He hesitated, and his hesitation was the answer. "No," I said, answering for him. "You would have been offended. You would have told Simone her mother was being cheap and selfish. You would have created a family drama that would have lasted for years. So I gave you another option. I treated you like an adult. I gave you a professional contract. You chose to sign it without reading it. You chose to ignore the rules. You didn't treat this place like it belonged to a member of your family. You treated it like a hotel you didn't have to pay for. Well, Gary, checkout time is here, and the bill is due. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. They had no more arguments. I had taken away all their ammunition. They were left with nothing but their own arrogance and the consequences it had wrought. Patricia Carter, a woman who was not used to being silenced, drew herself up to her full height. Her face was a thunderous mask of pride and fury. Well, you can take your contract and your pictures and you can shove them, she sneered. Good luck getting a single dime from us. We're not paying. She turned on her heel, expecting the rest of the family to follow her in a triumphant, defiant exit. But they stood frozen, looking between her and me, sensing that the final act was yet to come. I let out a long, slow sigh as if I were deeply disappointed. I assumed you might say that, Patricia, I said, my voice laced with a weary patience. I flipped to the last page in my folder. It was a copy of the contract's authorization clause. Per the agreement, a valid credit card was required to hold the dates on the calendar. That's standard practice for any rental property. I looked directly at Gary, my eyes holding his. The agreement you signed authorized me to charge that card for the full cost of the stay, as well as any damages and unpaid fees in the event of a dispute. I will be settling the bill that way this afternoon. I let the words hang in the air. It's all right there. In the contract you signed. The finality of it hit them like a physical blow. It was the ultimate checkmate. I had anticipated their every move. From their casual disrespect to their final defiant refusal to pay. I hadn't just built a case. I had built a cage, and they had walked into it, signed the paperwork and locked the door behind them. Gary looked down at the invoice in his hand, then at his mother, then at his crying wife. He was a coach who had been completely and utterly outplayed. There were no more moves to make. The game was over. The departure, the second time around, was a stark contrast to the first. There were no loud goodbyes, no boisterous promises to return. There was only a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with anger and humiliation. The Carter clan loaded themselves back into their caravan of minivans and SUVs, their faces grim and thunderous. They moved with the stunned, jerky motions of a defeated army in full retreat. No one looked at me. No one spoke a word. The weeks that followed were a cold war fought through the proxy of my daughter. Simone's phone became a battlefield. Her evenings were consumed by furious, tearful calls from Gary, from Patricia, from a rotating cast of aunts and cousins, all delivering the same message. Her mother was a cold, greedy, manipulative woman who had tricked them and stolen their money. They painted me as the villain, a calculating monster who had lured them into a trap under the guise of family hospitality. Simone, my poor gentle Simone, bore the brunt of it all. She would call me, her voice ragged with exhaustion and tears. Mama, they're saying you're trying to ruin them. Gary says his credit card is maxed out. Aunt Patricia is telling everyone you're not family anymore. I listened patiently to her pain. I validated her feelings, but I did not bend. Simone, I told her one night, my voice firm but loving, what they are angry about is not the money. They are angry about the boundary. They have never had one placed in front of them, and they don't know what to do with it. This is not your mess to clean up. It is theirs. The charge for $5,450 went through on Gary's credit card without a hitch. The payment confirmation email that landed in my inbox was a quiet digital validation of my victory. I used the money exactly as intended. I paid the professional cleaners, who worked for 2 full days to scrub the house back to its original pristine state. I had the deck resealed. I bought new towels. I had the septic tank inspected. Every penny was accounted for. This was never about profit. It was about principle. The silence from Gary and Simone stretched from weeks into months. The holidays passed. Spring arrived. The beach house thrived. I had a full slate of summer renters, all of whom signed their contracts, followed the rules and left glowing reviews. My business was a success. My sanctuary was secure, but my heart ached for my daughter. Then, one sunny afternoon in May, my phone rang. It was Gary. I hesitated for a long moment before answering. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet and humbled. All the bluster was gone. Deb, he said, I was wondering if Simone and I could come down for a weekend. Just us? We'd like to take you out to dinner. I was silent for a moment. Are you asking as a guest, Gary? I asked softly. Or as a client? He let out a short, sad laugh. As family, Deb. If you'll still have us. They came the following weekend. It was awkward at first, but that evening at a quiet seafood restaurant overlooking the water, Gary finally looked me in the eye. I am so sorry, he said, his voice thick with a sincerity I had never heard from him before. I was arrogant. I was disrespectful. I treated you and your home with a complete lack of respect. There's no excuse for it. I get it now. It wasn't about the money. It was about respect, and I failed. Miserably. Simone reached across the table and took my hand, her eyes shining with tears of relief. That weekend, they were the perfect guests. They took off their shoes at the door, they washed their dishes, they treated my home with the gentle care of people who understood its value. The following Christmas there was no chaotic caravan. There was only a single car that pulled into my driveway. Gary and Simone got out. They were alone. Gary was holding a bottle of my favorite wine and Simone was carrying a pecan pie from my favorite bakery in Charlotte. We spent the day cooking together in my pristine kitchen, just the three of us. We ate dinner at my beautifully set dining table. We talked, we laughed. It was quiet. It was peaceful. It was respectful. As Gary and I were clearing the dishes, he paused and looked around the immaculate living room. You know, he said, a wry smile on his face. It's a lot nicer without the 17 other Carters. I smiled back. A genuine warm smile. Yes, it is, son. I said. Yes, it is. A new tradition had begun. It wasn't the loud, chaotic tradition he had tried to force upon me. It was a new one born not of assumption but of understanding. It was a tradition built on a foundation of hard-won and very expensive respect, and my sanctuary, my beautiful Serenity Sands, was finally truly at peace.